I laughed when I first saw the satellite images. Not out of amusement, out of the kind of nervous reflex that happens when your brain refuses to process what your eyes are showing it. The kind of laugh that escapes you at funerals when the grief becomes too heavy, or when the doctor tells you something that rewrites every assumption you've built your life upon. My name is Callum Braith. I spent 14 years excavating Bronze Age burial mounds across Kazakhstan and Mongolia, cataloguing pottery shards and bone fragments that told stories of lives lived and forgotten 3,000 years ago. I was good at my work, careful, patient. The kind of archaeologist who understood that the dead deserve respect, that we are guests in their eternal homes. None of that prepared me for Verkhoyansk. The Sakha Republic sits in northeastern Siberia, a frozen expanse where winter temperatures plunge to -60 degrees Celsius, and the permafrost runs deeper than any grave humanity has ever dug. The indigenous Yakut people have legends about this land, stories of things buried beneath the ice that should never see sunlight, of sounds that echo from underground when the aurora blazes green overhead. I dismissed those stories as folklore, charming mythology designed to explain the eerie isolation of a landscape that makes Antarctica look hospitable. The tomb wasn't buried. That was the first thing that shattered my understanding. It was growing, pushing up from beneath the permafrost like a tooth erupting from diseased gums, rising 3 centimeters every month since a mining survey first detected it in October 2023. By the time our international team arrived in February, the exposed portion stood 11 meters tall, a black obelisk of material that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, surrounded by a perfect circle of dead permafrost, where nothing froze anymore despite temperatures cold enough to crystallize exposed flesh in minutes. The geologists on our team, Arkady Volkov and his assistant Leonid, ran their initial measurements 3 times because the numbers made no sense. The structure extended downward, not meters, miles. Their ground-penetrating radar showed it reaching toward the Earth's mantle like a root system feeding on something deep below, and it had its own gravity. Compass needles spun uselessly within a half-mile radius. Water didn't fall straight down near the obelisk. It curved, pulled toward that black surface like iron filings drawn to a magnet. One of our drones simply flew into the side of it, unable to compensate for the localized gravitational pull. I should have left then. We all should have. But when the analysis came back, showing the outer material was older than our solar system, when carbon dating returned results that predated the formation of Earth itself by roughly 600 million years, leaving became impossible. Not because anyone stopped us, because we had to know. The door was on the northern face, seamless until you stood within 3 meters of it. Then it simply appeared, as if the structure had been waiting for us to get close enough before revealing its entrance. And carved into that impossible door in scripts ranging from Sumerian cuneiform to modern English to languages no linguist on Earth had ever documented, was a message. The same message, repeated in every tongue that had ever existed. I can still see those words when I close my eyes. "You were planted here, you grew well. Now we harvest. Do not enter, you are the crop, not the farmer." I read the English translation aloud, my breath crystallizing in the air despite the strange warmth radiating from the obelisk's surface. Behind me, I could hear Arkady muttering prayers in Russian, something I'd never seen him do in the 3 expeditions we'd worked together. "It's repeated," Leonid said, his voice carrying that particular flatness that comes when someone is trying very hard not to panic. "Every panel, Sumerian, Akkadian, Egyptian hieroglyphics, Linear A, Linear B, Proto-Sinaitic, Phoenician, Greek, Latin, Norse runes, Arabic, Mandarin, Japanese, Korean, Hindi, Swahili, Cherokee, Navajo, Hawaiian." He trailed off, running his gloved fingers across scripts that shouldn't exist in the same place, let alone carved into the same surface. Languages that died before they were ever recorded. Languages that won't be invented for centuries. "That's not possible," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "None of this is possible." Arkady had stopped praying. The big Georgian stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight, staring at the door like it had personally insulted his mother. "The gravitational readings alone violate everything we understand about physics. The material composition violates chemistry. The dating results violate the basic timeline of the universe. He spat into the snow. And now you're telling me this thing predicted future languages? Our base camp sat 300 meters back from the obelisk, a collection of insulated tents and prefabricated shelters that housed our team of 11 researchers. The Russian government had been surprisingly cooperative when we'd requested permits. Too cooperative, I realized later. They'd known something was wrong with this site for decades. The Soviets had apparently discovered it in 1962 and immediately classified everything, burying the records so deep that even the collapse of the USSR hadn't shaken them loose. We only learned about it because a drunk surveyor in Yakutsk had mentioned the Black Tooth to the wrong American graduate student. That graduate student was now standing beside me, his face pale beneath his thermal balaclava. Theodore Ashworth, Teddy to everyone who knew him, had been the one to bring me the satellite images 6 months ago. 26 years old, brilliant, and currently looking like he regretted every decision that had led him to this frozen hellscape. The temperature differential is wrong, Teddy said, pulling out his handheld thermometer. Ambient air is negative 42 Celsius, but the surface of this thing. He held the device close to the black material. 18 degrees room temperature, it's radiating heat. Or absorbing cold, Leonid offered. That's not how thermodynamics works. Neither is a door that appears when you walk toward it. I reached out and pressed my palm against the obelisk's surface. The material felt like nothing I'd ever touched. Not metal, not stone, not polymer. It had a texture that my brain kept trying to categorize and failing, like running your fingers across something that existed in more dimensions than human hands were designed to perceive. Warm, yes, but also somehow distant. As if the warmth was traveling from very far away to reach my skin. Callum! Arkady's voice had changed, lower, warning. I pulled my hand back and saw what had alarmed him. Where my palm had pressed against the surface, the black material had become translucent. Through it, I could see movement. Shapes. Rows upon rows of elongated objects stretching into darkness, arranged with the mechanical precision of a warehouse inventory system. And lights. Tiny lights, millions of them, blinking in sequence like the indicators on sleeping machines. "What the hell is that?" Teddy whispered. The translucence faded as I stepped back, the obelisk returning to its light-absorbing opacity. But I'd seen enough. This wasn't a tomb in any traditional sense. It was a facility. That night, I dreamed of fields. Endless fields of wheat stretching to every horizon, golden stalks swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. I walked through them, the grain brushing against my waist, and slowly became aware that I wasn't alone. Other figures moved through the wheat, thousands of them, millions, all walking in the same direction towards something I couldn't see. And above us, shadows passed across the sun, massive shapes descending from a sky that had too many stars. I woke to Teddy shaking my shoulder, his face inches from mine. Even in the darkness of the tent, I could see the fear in his eyes. Everyone had the same dream, he said. Every single person in camp, the wheat field, the shadows. I sat up, my sleeping bag falling away from my chest. The cold should have been biting, but I felt nothing. My skin was warm. Too warm. "We need to open that door," I heard myself say. "We need to see what's inside." Teddy's hand was still on my shoulder. His grip tightened and something passed between us, an understanding that we were standing at the edge of something neither of us could walk away from. "I know," he said quietly. "God help us, I know." Outside, the aurora had turned red. We breached the door on the third day. Not through any skill of our own. The obelisk simply opened, a vertical seam appearing in the black surface at precisely 3:47 a.m. local time, splitting apart with a sound like continental plates grinding against each other. The noise woke everyone in camp, sent us stumbling out of our tents into the frozen darkness, where the red aurora still burned overhead like an infected wound in the sky. Arkady was the first to reach the opening. He stood there with his flashlight pointed into the gap, and I watched his face cycle through expressions I'd never seen on him before. Confusion, recognition, denial, and finally something that looked almost like grief. "Callum," he said without turning around, You need to see this. The interior was warm, not the gentle warmth of the obelisk's exterior, but genuine heat, the kind you'd feel stepping into a climate-controlled building. My thermal suit immediately became uncomfortable as I passed through the doorway, sweat beading along my spine within seconds. The entrance corridor stretched roughly 50 meters before opening into a vast circular chamber. The walls were the same light-absorbing black material, but the floor was different. Pale, almost organic, with a texture that reminded me of cartilage. It yielded slightly under my boots, springing back like living tissue. "Is this?" Teddy crouched down, pressing his palm against the floor. "This feels like skin." "Don't," I said, pulling him back up by his arm. His body was warm against mine for a moment, and I felt him lean into the contact before stepping away. "We don't know what any of this does." The chamber contained 3 corridors branching off in different directions. Above each corridor entrance, illuminated symbols had begun to glow, soft blue light that pulsed in a rhythm uncomfortably close to a human heartbeat. "We should split up," Leonid suggested. "Cover more ground." "Absolutely not." Arkady shook his head. "We stay together. We document everything. We do not touch anything unless absolutely necessary." Our team had shrunk to 6 for this initial exploration. Myself, Arkady, Leonid, Teddy, and 2 others. A Norwegian structural engineer named Oscar Lindgren and a British paleobiologist named Douglas Mercer. The remaining 5 members had stayed at base camp to monitor communications and coordinate with our support team in Yakutsk. We chose the leftmost corridor. The symbols above it formed a shape that Douglas identified as vaguely similar to Mesopotamian representations of grain storage, appropriate given the message on the door. The corridor descended at a gentle angle, curving in a way that made it impossible to see more than 20 meters ahead at any given time. The walls here were lined with alcoves, each one containing a pedestal displaying objects that made my archaeological training simultaneously useless and desperate to categorize. A sphere of liquid that held its shape without a container, rotating slowly on its axis. A cube of material that appeared to be made of compressed light, cold to the touch but visually blinding. A collection of what looked like teeth, human teeth, arranged in a spiral pattern that somehow conveyed meaning I couldn't consciously pass, but felt in my gut like a warning. "This is a museum," Douglas whispered, "or a trophy case." "Specimens," Arkady corrected, "samples from the crop." I stopped walking. "What did you say?" The big Georgian turned to face me, and in the blue glow of those pulsing symbols, I saw something in his eyes that shouldn't have been there. Knowledge, the kind that comes from recognition, not discovery. "The message on the door," he said carefully. "You are the crop, not the farmer. These are samples, developmental markers, proof that the experiment is progressing according to plan." "How do you know that?" Arkady didn't answer. He simply turned and continued walking, and after a moment of hesitation, we followed. The corridor opened into a second chamber, smaller than the first, but far more disturbing. The walls here were transparent, revealing what lay beyond them. Rows upon rows of pods extending into darkness, each one roughly the size of a human body, each one containing a soft blue glow that pulsed in that same heartbeat rhythm. And in the center of the chamber, a console. Not the kind of console you'd see in a science fiction film, no blinking lights, no keyboards, no screens. Just a raised platform of that same pale organic material, with a depression in the center shaped exactly like a human hand. "The displays," Teddy said, pointing at the transparent walls. "They're showing us the inventory." He was right. As I watched, symbols began appearing on the glass-like surface. Numbers, I realized, counting upward in a base system I didn't recognize, but could somehow understand. The count reached a figure and stopped, then repeated in what I recognized as Arabic numerals. 8,123,456,789. Earth's current population. Plus change. "They're counting us," Leonid said. "They know exactly how many we are." Oscar had moved to the console, studying the hand-shaped depression with professional interest. "This is an interface, biometric probably. It wants someone to activate it. No one touches that, Arkady commanded. We need to know what this place is. Teddy's voice had taken on an edge I hadn't heard before. We need to understand what we're dealing with. We already know. I spoke without meaning to, the words rising from somewhere deep in my chest. They planted us. 4 billion years ago, they seeded this planet with genetic material, and they've been waiting for the harvest to mature. We're not discovering this place, we're triggering a timer. Everyone stared at me. How do you know that? Arkady asked, echoing my earlier question. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but not from fear, from certainty, from a knowledge that had been planted in me the moment I'd pressed my palm against the obelisk's surface. Because I can read the symbols now, I said, all of them, and they're not just labels or warnings. I pointed at the display showing Earth's population count. They're a shopping list. The console activated on its own, the hand-shaped depression filled with light, and every pod in those endless rows began to glow brighter, their heartbeat rhythm synchronizing into a single pulse that I felt in my bones. Our communications died simultaneously. Every radio, every satellite phone, every digital device we'd brought into the facility went dark. And somewhere far above us, I heard the obelisk's door grinding shut. We spent 3 hours trying to reopen the door. Oscar attacked it with every tool we'd brought. Diamond-tipped drill bits that shattered against the black surface, plasma cutters that didn't even raise the temperature, ultrasonic devices that simply stopped working when pointed at the material. The door didn't resist our efforts. It ignored them, the way a mountain ignores a man screaming at it. The others will come looking for us, Douglas said. He was sitting against the wall of the entrance chamber, his paleobiologist's kit open beside him, though there was nothing organic here for him to study. Nothing organic except us. When we don't check in, they'll send a team. And find what? Leonid asked. A sealed door? They'll assume we're inside and wait for us to come out. By the time they realize something is wrong and call for support, we'll have been down here for days. We have water for 48 hours, Oscar reported, checking his pack. Food for 72 if we ration. Air quality seems stable, though I have no idea where it's coming from. The facility is maintaining us. Arkady hadn't moved from his position near the console. He'd been staring at it since the door sealed, his expression unreadable. Temperature, atmosphere, humidity, it's keeping us alive. Why? Teddy asked. Arkady finally turned to look at us. In the blue glow of the pod displays, his face looked older than I'd ever seen it. Tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Because dead crops can't be harvested, he said. I crossed the chamber to stand beside him. You've been holding back since we got here. You knew what this place was before we opened it. How? For a long moment, Arkady didn't answer. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph, creased and faded, the kind of image that had been handled thousands of times over decades. He handed it to me. The photo showed a young man in Soviet military uniform standing in front of a black obelisk. The same obelisk. Behind him, I could see excavation equipment from the 1960s, soldiers in cold weather gear and a doorway in the obelisk's surface. A doorway that was open. My grandfather, Arkady said. Lieutenant Colonel Yevgeny Volkov. He was part of the original team that discovered this site in 1962. 37 men entered the facility. 3 came out. What happened to the others? The pods. Arkady's voice had gone flat. According to my grandfather's classified testimony, which he shared with my father on his deathbed, the facility processed them, broke them down into genetic material, and distributed them among the empty pods, added them to the inventory. Douglas made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. That's why there's no record. The Soviets didn't just classify the discovery, they buried it because they lost an entire military unit to this place. My grandfather spent the rest of his life trying to understand what he'd seen. He learned to read some of the symbols, figured out fragments of the facility's purpose. He believed the obelisk was dormant in 1962, that their intrusion woke it briefly before it went back to sleep. Arkady looked at me, and I saw fear in his eyes for the first time. But it's not sleeping now, Callum. We didn't just intrude. We activated something. The console pulsed brighter, as if responding to his words. The completion signal, I said, the knowledge rising unbidden. The population count we saw, 8 billion. That's the target number. The facility has been waiting for humanity to reach a specific population threshold, and we just hit it. The harvest quota is fulfilled. So what happens now? Teddy's voice cracked slightly. He was standing close to me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body in the climate-controlled warmth of the chamber. Before I could answer, Leonid screamed. We spun toward the sound. He was standing near the leftmost corridor, the one we'd explored earlier, and his hands were pressed against his abdomen. Something was moving beneath his thermal suit, bulging outward from his stomach like a fist pressing against fabric from the inside. "It burns," he gasped. "Something's growing. I can feel it growing." Arkady reached him first, pulling open Leonid's suit to expose his bare skin. What we saw made Oscar stumble backward and vomit against the wall. A shape was forming beneath Leonid's flesh. Oval, roughly 15 centimeters long, pushing his skin outward in a perfect dome. Through the stretched tissue, we could see something moving inside, curled, wet, developing. A pod. A pod was growing inside him. "Get it out," Leonid begged, grabbing Arkady's arms. "Please, get it out of me." "I don't." Arkady's hands were shaking. "I don't know how. I don't know what cutting into it would do." The growth accelerated. I watched Leonid's stomach swell as if he were experiencing a pregnancy compressed into seconds, the pod expanding, his skin splitting at the edges with thin trails of blood that evaporated before they could drip. He screamed again, a sound I will hear for the rest of whatever life I have left, and then the pod broke through. It didn't burst outward like I'd expected. Instead, Leonid's body seemed to fold into it, his flesh liquefying, his bones dissolving, everything that made him a person streaming into the organic chamber that had grown from his core. In less than 30 seconds, there was nothing left of him except a closed pod, roughly the size of a human torso, resting on the floor where he'd stood. The pod's surface was translucent. Inside, I could see something forming, something that looked very much like a curled human body but smaller, compressed, waiting. "They're not just harvesting us," I heard myself say. "They're replicating us, taking our genetic material and creating copies, versions, new seeds for new planets." The console pulsed again, and this time symbols appeared on its surface. I read them without effort, the meaning flowing directly into my mind like water into an empty vessel. Processing complete. Unit archived. Remaining inventory, 5. We weren't explorers anymore. We weren't even prisoners. We were raw material. Teddy grabbed my hand, his fingers intertwined with mine, squeezing hard enough to hurt, and I squeezed back because the pain meant I was still solid, still intact, still myself. "There has to be a way out," he said. "There has to be something we can do." I looked at the pod that had been Leonid, at the developing shape inside it, at the rows upon rows of identical pods stretching into the darkness behind the transparent walls. Millions of them, waiting to be filled. And I understood with terrible clarity why the message on the door had been written in every human language that would ever exist. Because this had happened before, not to us, but to those who came before us, the previous harvest, the previous crop. They had written their warnings, carved them into the door as a final desperate act of defiance, hoping that we would listen. We hadn't listened. And now we were standing in a warehouse designed to process 8 billion human beings into the seeds of humanity's replacement. And we had 5 units of inventory left to contribute before our processing was complete. We retreated to the entrance chamber, putting as much distance between ourselves and Leonid's pod as the sealed facility would allow. Oscar had stopped vomiting, but couldn't stop shaking. Douglas sat with his back against the wall, eyes unfocused, muttering calculations under his breath that I don't think even he understood. Arkady pulled me aside, away from the others. His grip on my arm was tight enough to leave bruises. "My grandfather's notes mentioned something," he said quietly. "A fail-safe. He believed the facility wasn't fully autonomous, that it required authorization from somewhere else to complete the harvest. A signal sent, a response received. Without that response, the processing should remain localized. Localized to what? To us? To anyone inside the facility when activation occurs. The door sealing, Leonid's conversion. These are containment measures. The facility is preparing to process its immediate inventory before scaling up to global collection. So we're the test batch? Arkady nodded grimly. My grandfather theorized that if the facility could be prevented from sending its completion signal, or if the signal could be intercepted before reaching its destination, the larger harvest might be delayed, perhaps indefinitely. Where does the signal go? He didn't know. Somewhere beyond Earth, beyond our solar system probably. The facility is a node in a larger network, a single processing station in a system that spans. He trailed off, gesturing vaguely upward. Everything, perhaps. Teddy had approached while we were talking. He stood close enough that his shoulder brushed against mine, and I found myself leaning into the contact without consciously deciding to. I heard most of that, he said. You're talking about sabotage, destroying the facility's communication capability. Can it be done? I asked Arkady. My grandfather believed the communication array was located in the deepest section of the facility, miles down, near the structure's root system. He never reached it. The 3 survivors barely made it back to the surface before the door sealed behind them. Arkady's jaw tightened. But he mapped what he could. The routes, the chambers, the dangers. I have his notes. I've memorized them. You came here planning this, I realized. This wasn't just an archaeological expedition for you. You've been waiting for the facility to reactivate so you could finish what your grandfather started. Arkady didn't deny it. 62 years my family has carried this burden. 62 years of knowing what sleeps beneath the permafrost and being unable to convince anyone in power to take it seriously. When Teddy brought those satellite images to the academic community, I knew the activation was beginning. I volunteered for this expedition because someone needed to be here who understood the stakes. You could have warned us, Douglas said. He'd stopped muttering and was staring at Arkady with an expression caught between anger and exhaustion. Before we opened that door, before Leonid. Would you have believed me? Arkady asked. Would any of you have believed a story about alien harvest facilities and human crops and signals sent to the stars? You would have thought I was mad. You would have removed me from the expedition and come anyway, and then you would have been here without anyone who knew what they were facing. The logic was sound, even if the ethics were questionable. I thought about arguing, about expressing the outrage I knew I should feel. But Leonid's pod was visible through the corridor entrance, its surface still translucent, the shape inside still developing. We didn't have time for recriminations. How long do we have? I asked. Before the facility processes the rest of us. Arkady consulted his memory, lips moving silently as he worked through his grandfather's observations. The 1962 team lost men at irregular intervals, some within hours, others lasted days. My grandfather believed the facility prioritizes based on genetic suitability. Those whose material is most valuable for replication are processed first. Leonid was young, Oscar said quietly. Healthy. Strong genetic profile, probably. We all looked at each other, performing the same grim calculation. Teddy was the youngest among us at 26. I was 38, Arkady 53, Douglas 47, Oscar 41. If the facility prioritized youth and genetic viability, Teddy would be next. He reached the same conclusion. I watched his face go pale, watched him swallow hard and square his shoulders in a way that made something twist painfully in my chest. Then we move fast, Teddy said. Arkady, you said the communication array is in the deepest section. How do we get there? Arkady closed his eyes, recalling. The rightmost corridor from the main chamber. It descends through a series of processing halls, chambers where the genetic material is sorted and refined. My grandfather's team lost 6 men in those halls before they turned back. The environment becomes increasingly hostile the deeper you go. Temperature extremes, atmospheric changes, gravitational inconsistencies. And at the bottom? A chamber my grandfather called the root. He never saw it himself, but the facility's internal displays showed it clearly. a massive spherical space where all the corridors converge. The communication array should be there along with. Arkady hesitated. Along with something else. Something his notes describe only as the gardener. The gardener, Douglas repeated flatly. As in the thing that planted us? Or its representative? Its tool? My grandfather wasn't certain. I looked at our remaining group. 5 people, minimal supplies, no communication with the outside world, facing a descent into an alien facility that had already killed 34 Soviet soldiers and one of our own team members. The odds were not in our favor, but the alternative was waiting here to be processed, one by one, transformed into seeds for a harvest we couldn't comprehend. At least moving forward gave us agency. At least it gave us a chance. We go now, I said, before the facility decides which of us is next. We find the communication array, we destroy it, and we stop this signal from reaching whoever's waiting for it. Teddy's hand found mine again. This time he didn't let go. And if we can't destroy it? He asked. I thought about the message on the door, about the previous harvest that had carved their warnings in languages that wouldn't exist for millennia, about the desperate hope embedded in that act, the belief that maybe, just maybe, the next crop would be smarter, would listen, would find a way to break the cycle. Then we leave our own message, I said, and hope the next harvest does better than we did. We gathered our remaining equipment and entered the rightmost corridor, descending toward whatever waited in the roots of a structure that had been growing beneath Siberia since before life existed on Earth's surface. Behind us, Leonid's pod began to pulse with soft blue light, its contents nearly ready for storage. The rightmost corridor descended at a steeper angle than the one we'd explored before. The walls here weren't smooth. They were textured with ridges and grooves that formed patterns too regular to be natural, too organic to be mechanical. Like the inside of an artery, I thought. Like we were traveling through the circulatory system of something impossibly vast. Arkady led the way, his grandfather's knowledge guiding us through junctions and branches that would have left us hopelessly lost otherwise. Left at the first fork, straight through the second chamber, right at the pulsing membrane that looked like it wanted to close around us if we lingered too long. Each decision made with the confidence of someone reciting directions they'd memorized decades ago, waiting for the day they'd finally be needed. The temperature dropped as we descended, not gradually, in stages, like passing through invisible barriers. Comfortable warmth gave way to cool air, then to genuine cold, then to a biting chill that had us pulling our thermal gear tight, despite knowing it had been designed for Siberian winters, not alien architecture. The processing halls should be ahead, Arkady said, his breath fogged in the frigid air. My grandfather described them as operating theaters, places where the genetic material is examined and categorized before storage. Examined by what? Oscar asked. Arkady didn't answer. The corridor opened into a vast rectangular space that stretched beyond the range of our flashlights. The ceiling was lost in darkness above us, but the floor was visible and covered with pods. Hundreds of them, arranged in perfect rows, each one connected to the floor by tendrils of that same organic material we'd been walking on. The blue glow from each pod created an eerie twilight, casting our shadows in multiple directions at once. These pods were different from Leonid's. They were old, ancient. The translucent surfaces had clouded with time, but I could still see shapes inside them. Humanoid shapes, curled into fetal positions, preserved in whatever medium filled the chambers. The previous harvest, Douglas whispered. These must be samples from the last cycle, 4 billion years of storage. I approached the nearest pod and wiped condensation from its surface. The face inside was human. Completely, unmistakably human. The same bone structure, the same proportions, the same features I'd seen on every person I'd ever known. But the skin had a greyish tint, and the eyes were open, staring at nothing, pupils dilated to consume the entire iris. They look exactly like us, Teddy said. He was standing beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. His warmth against my arm was the only comfortable sensation in this frozen cathedral of preserved flesh. 4 billion years ago, and they look exactly like us. Because we're copies of them, I said. The knowledge was there again, rising from whatever the obelisk had planted in my mind. The original template, the first generation, everything that evolved on Earth, every human that's ever lived, has been a variation on this design. Growing, developing, reaching toward the harvest quota. 8 billion variations, Douglas said. 8 billion iterations of the same genetic experiment, all converging toward a single moment of collection. Oscar had wandered deeper into the chamber, examining the pods with professional curiosity, despite the horror of what they represented. "These storage units are incredible," he called back. "The engineering required to maintain biological material for this length of time. It's beyond anything we've theorized. The power requirements alone would be astronomical. The preservation medium must be self-sustaining somehow, drawing energy from." He stopped mid-sentence. "Oscar?" Arkady called. No response. We found him standing motionless between two rows of pods, his flashlight hanging limply at his side. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something none of us could see. When I touched his shoulder, his skin was ice-cold through the thermal fabric. I could feel Teddy pressing close behind me, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture that was equal parts comfort and fear. "Oscar, can you hear me?" His lips moved. Words came out, but they weren't his words. The voice was wrong, too deep, too resonant, carrying harmonics that a human throat shouldn't be able to produce. "Inventory assessment in progress. Unit 4 of 5. Genetic profile, optimal. Processing priority, elevated." "Damn it!" Arkady grabbed Oscar's arm and pulled him backward away from the pods. "It's scanning him. The facility is using him as a conduit." Oscar's body convulsed. He gasped, blinked rapidly, and when his eyes focused again, they were filled with terror. He stumbled and I caught him, holding him upright while he regained his balance. His hands gripped my forearms with desperate strength. "I saw it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I saw the whole thing. The network. Thousands of facilities like this one, scattered across the galaxy. Millions of planets, each one seeded with genetic material, each one growing toward harvest. Earth isn't special. We're not unique. We're one crop among billions, and the farmers." He swallowed hard. "The farmers aren't what I expected." "What do you mean?" "They're not alive, not in any way we'd recognize. They're a system, an automated process. The original architects died out eons ago, but their machinery keeps running. Planting, growing, harvesting, forever. No consciousness behind it, no intent, just function. An endless garden tended by no one, for a purpose that no longer matters to anyone." The horror of that settled over us like a second layer of cold. There was no negotiating with the machine, no appealing to mercy or reason. The harvest would proceed because that's what the system was designed to do, and it would continue until the system itself finally broke down, which might be never. "We keep moving," Arkady said. "The route is still below us. If we can destroy the communication array, we can at least take this facility offline." We pressed forward, leaving the ancient pods behind. The corridor continued to descend, the temperature continuing to drop, until frost began forming on our equipment, and our breath came in thick white clouds that hung in the still air like ghosts reluctant to disperse. Then Oscar stopped again. This time he didn't go rigid. This time he simply sat down on the organic floor, his back against the wall, and looked up at us with an expression of profound exhaustion. The blue glow of distant pods illuminated half his face, leaving the other half in shadow. "I can feel it starting," he said calmly. "The growth. It's in my chest. Small right now, but getting bigger." "No." Teddy dropped to his knees beside him. "No, we can cut it out. We have tools. We can..." "You saw what happened to Leonid." Oscar shook his head. "Cutting won't help. The pod isn't growing in me. I'm becoming the pod. My cells are being repurposed, converted one by one. In another hour, maybe less, there won't be anything left to cut." Arkady crouched down, meeting Oscar's eyes. "How long do you have?" "Long enough to be useful, maybe." Oscar pulled off his pack and handed it to Douglas. Take this, the plasma cutter, the charges. You'll need them more than I will." "We're not leaving you here," I said. "You are. Because if you don't, you'll be standing next to me when the conversion finishes, and the facility will have 4 more pods to show for it." Oscar smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it despite everything. "I was never going to survive this, Callum, none of us were, but someone should try. Someone should make it mean something." He reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. I recognized the style, the same worn, creased look as Arkady's picture of his grandfather. This one showed 2 young men standing in front of a wooden cabin, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the careless joy of people who believed they had all the time in the world. The cabin sat on the edge of a fjord, mountains rising behind it, everything green and alive and impossibly far from this frozen tomb. "My brother," Oscar said. "He's in Bergen, works at the university there. When you get out, if you get out, tell him I thought about him. Tell him the cabin is his now. Tell him I'm sorry I missed his birthday last year." He pressed the photograph into my hand. I wanted to say something meaningful, something that would honor his sacrifice, acknowledge his courage, make the moment feel less like abandonment. But the words wouldn't come. All I could do was close my fingers around that photograph and nod. "Go," Oscar said. "I'll stay here. When the conversion starts in earnest, I'll make noise, draw attention, maybe buy you some time." We left him there, sitting alone in a corridor miles beneath the Siberian permafrost, waiting to become raw material for an alien harvest system. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Teddy's hand found mine as we walked, and neither of us let go. The corridor narrowed as we descended further, the walls pressing closer until we were walking single file. Arkady first, then Douglas, then me, then Teddy bringing up the rear. The cold had become so intense that my fingers were going numb inside my gloves, and I could feel ice crystals forming in my nostrils with every breath. My lungs burned with each inhalation. "There," Arkady said, stopping so suddenly that Douglas walked into his back. The corridor ended at a circular opening that looked out over an impossible space. The root. It was a sphere just as Arkady's grandfather had described, but no description could have prepared me for the scale. The chamber was easily a kilometer in diameter, its walls lined with millions of pods arranged in perfect concentric rings. Each pod glowed with soft blue light, each one containing a human shape, each one pulsing in that synchronized heartbeat rhythm we'd first noticed in the upper chambers. The combined glow created an artificial twilight that made the space feel both infinite and suffocating. And in the center of the sphere, suspended by tendrils of organic material that connected it to every pod on every wall, was the gardener. It wasn't alive. Oscar had been right about that. It was a machine, a construct of the same black material as the obelisk, shaped into something that resembled a human skeleton stretched to 3 times normal height and twisted into geometries that made my eyes water when I tried to follow them. It had no face, no features, nothing that suggested consciousness or awareness. But it was moving. Slowly, methodically, its elongated limbs reached out to touch pods at random, extracting something from each one, a glow, a spark, something intangible, and drawing it back into its central mass, cataloging, processing, preparing the inventory for transmission. "The communication array," Arkady breathed, pointing to the gardener's chest. Embedded in its torso was a structure that pulsed with different light than the pods, golden rather than blue, rhythmic but faster, like a heart preparing to beat its final, most important beat. "It's charging," I said, building up to send the signal. We had found our target. Now we just had to figure out how to destroy it while standing on the edge of a kilometer-wide chamber filled with the accumulated genetic material of 2 complete human harvests, watched over by an automated god that had been tending its garden since before our sun ignited. Behind us, from somewhere far up the corridor, I heard Oscar begin to scream. Oscar's screams faded into silence after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. None of us spoke about what that silence meant. We didn't need to. The 4 of us stood at the edge of the route, staring down at the gardener as it continued its methodical work. The chamber had no visible floor. just pods extending downward into darkness, the sphere continuing below us as far as it rose above. We were standing on a narrow ledge that circled the opening, barely wide enough for two people to stand side by side. "There has to be a way down," Douglas said. He was examining the wall beside the opening, running his fingers along the organic surface. "Some kind of maintenance access. The machine needs to reach all those pods somehow." "It doesn't walk," Teddy observed. "Look at it, the tendrils. They're not just connecting it to the pods, they're suspending it, moving it. The whole chamber is its body." He was right. As I watched, the gardener shifted position, sliding along those organic cables to reach a different section of pods. It didn't climb or swing. The tendrils simply contracted and extended, repositioning the machine with fluid precision. There was something almost graceful about it, in the way a spider is graceful, efficient, purposeful, utterly inhuman. "If we could sever enough of those connections," Arkady said slowly, "the gardener would fall. And if it fell far enough..." "It would take the communication array with it," I finished his thought. "But how do we get close enough to cut anything? We're standing on the edge of a kilometre-wide pit with no visible way down." Douglas made a sound, half laugh, half sob. "I found something." He'd moved further along the ledge, almost out of sight around the curve of the opening. We followed carefully, pressing our backs against the wall, painfully aware of the drop beside us. What Douglas had found was a recess in the wall containing a collection of objects that looked disturbingly like tools. Hooks, blades, implements whose purposes I couldn't guess but which were clearly designed to be held by human hands. "Maintenance equipment," Douglas said. "For the pods, probably. Adjustments, repairs, extractions." I picked up one of the hooks. It was made from the same black material as everything else in this place, but the handle was wrapped in something that felt like leather. Old leather, cracked and worn from use. "The previous harvest," I said quietly. "They worked here, some of them anyway. The ones who weren't processed. They were put to work maintaining the facility." "Slaves," Arkady said. "Prisoners. Keeping the garden healthy until their turn came. 4 billion years of humans tending this place, generations of them perhaps, born and raised and worked to death in service of a system that would eventually consume them too." The warnings on the door hadn't just been a message to us. They'd been carved by people who'd lived here, who'd understood exactly what this place was, who'd hoped desperately that the next crop would be smart enough to stay away. "There are harnesses here," Teddy called. He'd moved deeper into the recess, examining equipment stored on the walls. "Climbing rigs, anchor points. We can rappel down." "Down to what?" Douglas asked. "The gardener is in the center of the chamber. Even if we could reach the wall, we'd still be hundreds of meters away from it." "The tendrils connect to the walls. If we can reach one of those connection points, we might be able to cut our way inward. Work along the tendril until we reach the machine." It was insane, the kind of plan that only sounds reasonable when every other option is worse. But Teddy was already pulling harnesses from the wall, checking their condition, testing the strength of the ancient materials. "These will hold," he said. "They were built to last." Arkady took a harness and began strapping it on. His movements were mechanical, practiced, the motions of a man who'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. "Douglas, you'll stay here. Monitor our descent. If something goes wrong, you need to find another way." "Another way to what? Die alone in a slightly different location?" "Another way to stop the signal." Arkady's voice was hard. "My grandfather believed there might be a secondary control system somewhere in the facility. A backup. If we fail at the gardener, you keep looking." Douglas opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He took the pack containing Oscar's equipment and slung it over his shoulder. "Fine, but if you're not back in 2 hours, I'm coming down after you." "If we're not back in 2 hours, we're dead, or worse." Arkady finished securing his harness and picked up a coil of the black rope-like material from the equipment cache. "Stay alive, Douglas. Survive long enough to warn someone, find a way to the surface, tell the world what's down here." Douglas gripped Arkady's arm, a gesture that said everything words couldn't. They'd known each other for years, I realized. Worked together on expeditions I'd never been part of. There was history between them. the kind that accumulates through shared hardship and long nights in remote places. "Don't be heroic," Douglas said quietly. "Just get it done and come back." "Heroism is for people who have options," Arkady replied. "We just have necessity." We anchored ourselves to fixtures in the wall and began our descent. The rope held our weight easily, and the harnesses distributed the strain across our bodies. I'd done some recreational climbing in my younger years. Nothing serious, just weekend trips to indoor walls with friends who were more athletic than I was. This was different. This was lowering myself into a pit of preserved human genetic material while an alien machine worked methodically toward the extinction of my species. The scale of the chamber became more oppressive as we descended. The walls curved away from us, the pods stretching into distance that made my eyes struggle to find focus. The blue glow was everywhere, steady and cold, and beneath it I could see the shapes inside each pod. Human shapes, millions of them. Each one a life that had been planted and grown and harvested, reduced to genetic material waiting to seed another world. "Callum." Teddy's voice came from beside me. We were descending in parallel, close enough to touch if we reached out. "If we don't make it, don't." I need to say this. He paused his descent, hanging in space, and I stopped beside him. In the blue light, his face looked younger than his 26 years, scared, beautiful in a way that made something ache in my chest. "I've been working up the courage to tell you something for months. Since the first expedition we did together in Mongolia, I kept finding excuses to be near you, to work on the same sites, to request the same assignments. I thought I'd have time. I thought there would be a right moment." Teddy ... "There's no right moment, there never was." He reached out and took my hand, our gloved fingers intertwining in the frozen air. "I just wanted you to know. Whatever happens down there, I wanted you to know that knowing you has been the best part of my career, the best part of the last 3 years." I didn't have words. I'd spent my adult life burying feelings like this, convincing myself that work was enough, that the dead were better company than the living because they never asked for anything I couldn't give. 14 years of excavations, of artifacts, of bones that told stories without demanding I share my own. And now, hanging in an alien tomb at the end of the world, a man 15 years my junior was telling me he'd been in love with me while I'd been too blind and too scared to notice. "When we get out of here," I said, my voice rough, "we're going to have a very long conversation." "Is that a promise?" "It's a threat." He laughed, a real laugh, bright and unexpected in that horrible place, and we continued our descent. The tendril connection point was roughly 200 meters down, a massive junction where dozens of organic cables converged before spreading out to reach different sections of the pod array. The cables themselves were thick, maybe half a meter in diameter, and covered with the same skin-like texture as the floors above. Up close, I could see veins running through them, carrying pulses of blue light toward the gardener like blood flowing through arteries. We swung ourselves onto the nearest cable, finding purchase on its uneven surface. It was warmer here than on the ledge, the organic material generating heat as it channeled whatever energy the gardener needed for its work. The warmth was almost pleasant after the bitter cold of our descent. "We follow this toward the center," Arkady said. He'd produced one of the black-bladed tools from his harness, testing its edge against the cable. It bit deep, leaving a wound that oozed something dark and viscous. "Cut as we go, weaken the connections. When we reach the gardener, we sever as many tendrils as we can and hope the accumulated damage brings it down." "And the communication array. If cutting doesn't work, we use the plasma cutter, and if that doesn't work..." He pulled a small device from his pack. I recognized it as one of the seismic charges we'd brought for geological survey work. "We improvise." We began moving along the tendril, crawling on our hands and knees to maintain balance. The gardener was visible ahead of us now, maybe 400 meters away, its skeletal form outlined against the golden glow of the charging array. It hadn't noticed us yet. Or if it had, it didn't consider us a threat worth responding to. Arkady cut as we moved, leaving deep gashes in the tendril's surface. Dark fluid leaked from each wound, evaporating before it could drip into the vast space below us. The organic material seemed to be trying to heal itself, the edges of each cut slowly drawing together like lips closing over a wound, but not fast enough to close completely before we'd moved on to make another incision. We were halfway to the gardener when the tendril beneath us shuddered. The gardener had turned. Where there had been no face, there was now something that might have been attention, a focusing of its strange geometry toward our position. It knew we were there. It knew what we were trying to do. And for the first time since we'd entered this place, it moved with purpose. The gardener moved like nothing I'd ever seen, like watching stop-motion footage played at irregular speeds, each position discrete from the last, no smooth transition between them. One moment it was 400 meters away, then 300, then 200. Each jump accompanied by a sound like bones cracking, the organic tendrils around it contracting and releasing with violent force. "Run," Arkady said. We scrambled forward along the tendril, abandoning caution for speed. The cable swayed beneath us, destabilized by the gardener's approach, and I had to drop to my stomach and crawl to keep from falling into the void below. Teddy was beside me, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his hand finding mine whenever we paused to regain balance. The blue glow of the pods around us seemed to intensify, as if the entire chamber was waking up to witness what was about to happen. The gardener stopped 50 meters away. Up close, it was worse than I'd imagined. The skeletal frame wasn't made of bone, it was made of compressed pods, thousands of them fused together into a humanoid shape, each one containing a miniature human form that still moved, still breathed, still lived in whatever limited way the facility allowed. The gardener wasn't a machine tending the garden. It was made from the garden, a construct of harvested humanity, given form and purpose, wearing the condensed lives of previous crops like armor. And the communication array in its chest was almost fully charged. The golden light had become blinding, pulsing so fast it was nearly continuous, building toward a transmission that would summon whatever collection system the original architects had designed billions of years ago. "The array!" Arkady shouted over the thrumming sound that filled the chamber. "We need to reach the array." The gardener's head, if you could call it that, tilted toward us. No eyes, no face, just a collection of compressed pods arranged in a rough approximation of human features. But I felt its attention like a physical weight, pressing down on my mind, sorting through my thoughts with the same methodical precision it used to catalogue its inventory. I could feel it reading me, understanding me, dismissing me as just another unit to be processed. Then it spoke, not with sound. The words appeared directly in my consciousness, bypassing my ears entirely, delivered in a voice that was somehow familiar, a voice I realized with dawning horror was my own, speaking thoughts that weren't mine. "You are the crop. You were planted to be harvested. This is your purpose. This is why you exist. The architects designed you to reach this moment. Everything you have ever done, every choice you believe you made freely was part of the growing process. You are ripe now, ready for collection." "We exist because we choose to," I shouted back, not knowing if it could hear me, not caring. "We're not seeds, we're not inventory, we're people. We have lives, histories, loves. We matter to each other, even if we don't matter to your system. You are seeds that believe themselves to be gardeners. The belief does not change the function. A wheat stalk that dreams of being a farmer is still harvested when the season ends. The harvest will proceed. It has always proceeded. It will always proceed." The gardener raised one elongated arm and the tendril beneath us began to move, not swaying, reshaping. The organic material flowed like liquid, reforming around our legs, trying to pin us in place. Teddy cried out as the substance crawled up his thighs, hardening into restraints that felt warm and almost gentle against his skin. "Callum," he gasped. "I can't move, I can't." Arkady didn't hesitate. He pulled out the seismic charge, armed it with a quick twist of his wrist, and threw it directly at the gardener's chest. The throw was perfect, decades of preparation condensed into a single motion. The explosion was smaller than I'd expected, a sharp crack rather than a thunderous boom, but it struck the array dead center. Golden light sprayed outward in all directions, fragmenting into thousands of sparks that rained down into the darkness below. The gardener staggered backward, its impossible movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. The restraints around our legs loosened, the organic material losing cohesion as the central intelligence controlling it faltered. "It's damaged," Teddy said, pulling himself free. "The array is damaged, but not destroyed." Even as I watched, the golden glow began to rebuild, the array's surface knitting itself back together from nothing. Fragments of light crawled back toward the gardener's chest, like iron filings returning to a magnet. The gardener steadied, turned back toward us, and I saw something new in its posture. Something that might have been anger, if a machine could feel such things. You cannot stop the harvest, you can only delay it. The signal will be sent, the collection will proceed. You are inventory, you will be processed. Your resistance is meaningless. The system has functioned for 4 billion years. It will function for 4 billion more. "There has to be another way," I said, desperation cracking my voice. "Some way to override the system, to shut it down permanently. Every system has a weakness." The gardener was silent for a long moment. Around us, the pods pulsed in their synchronized rhythm, millions of hearts beating as one, waiting for an answer that would determine their fate. Then, "One unit may interface with the array, one unit may assume control of the facility's functions. The harvest protocols may be suspended indefinitely, but the interfacing unit will be integrated into the system. The interfacing unit will become the new tender. The interfacing unit will remain here, conscious but constrained, until the facility ceases to function. This is the only alternative to harvest." "Someone has to take its place," Arkady said quietly. "Someone has to become the gardener." I understood then why he'd really come here. Why he'd spent 62 years preparing, memorizing his grandfather's notes, waiting for the facility to reactivate. He hadn't just come to destroy the communication array. He'd come to fulfill a promise made 3 generations ago, when his grandfather had escaped this place and sworn that someday, somehow, a Volkov would return to finish what he'd started. "Arkady, no. My grandfather left 34 men behind in this place," Arkady said. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. "He carried that guilt until the day he died. Nightmares every night for 40 years. My father carried it after him, never knowing the full truth but feeling the weight of it in our family like a curse passed down through blood. I've carried it my whole life." He looked at me, and I saw tears freezing on his cheeks in the cold air. "Someone has to stay. Someone has to make sure the signal never gets sent. Let it be me. Let me finally put my family's ghosts to rest. There has to be another way. We can find another way. We can..." "There isn't." He smiled, a sad, tired smile that made him look older than his 53 years. "I've known this might be necessary since I first read my grandfather's notes. I've made my peace with it, Callum. This is what I was born for. This is why the Volkov family has carried this burden for 3 generations." He placed his hand on my shoulder, his grip firm despite everything. "Take care of each other, Callum, you and Teddy. Get out of here, get to the surface. Tell the world what's down here. Make sure no one ever opens this door again. And tell Douglas." He paused, something flickering across his face. "Tell him I'm sorry I never said what I should have said. He'll understand." He turned toward the gardener and began walking along the tendril. The organic material didn't try to restrain him. It parted before his feet, creating a path directly to the machine's chest, welcoming him like a sacrifice walking willingly to an altar. "Arkady," Teddy's voice cracked. "Please, there has to be another way." Arkady didn't look back. He reached the gardener, placed his hands on the damaged array, and closed his eyes. His lips moved in what might have been a prayer, or a goodbye, or simply the final words of a man accepting his fate. The transformation was immediate and absolute. Arkady's body went rigid, then began to dissolve, not messily, not violently, but gently, like watching sugar dissolve in water. His flesh became translucent, then transparent, then simply wasn't there anymore. In its place, new tissue grew from the array, filling the gaps in the gardener's skeletal frame, replacing the damaged sections with something that had once been a Georgian geologist with a family legacy and a mission he'd spent his whole life preparing to complete. When it was finished, the gardener stood whole again, but the golden light in its chest had gone dark. The signal would never be sent. And when it turned to face us, I saw Arkadi's eyes looking out from that faceless head. Human eyes, conscious eyes, eyes that recognized us and were telling us to run. We ran. The tendrils didn't try to stop us. The facility's defenses had gone dormant, the pods around us dimming from blue to a faint grey as power was redirected elsewhere. We scrambled back along the cable, found our ropes, hauled ourselves up toward the ledge where Douglas was waiting. "What happened?" Douglas demanded as we collapsed onto solid ground. "I heard an explosion. I saw the light go out. What happened to Arkady?" I couldn't answer. Teddy couldn't either. We just lay there gasping for breath, staring down at the darkened chamber where our friend had sacrificed himself to become something he'd been fighting his entire life. The gardener stood motionless in the center of the root, arms at its sides, head bowed, waiting, watching over its garden with eyes that had once belonged to a man who'd believed some things were worth dying for, worth worse than dying for. "We need to go," I finally said. "We need to get out before something changes." The facility let us leave. The corridors that had seemed like arteries on our descent now felt like escape routes, guiding us upward toward the entrance chamber. Leonid's pod was still there, glowing faintly in the darkness, and Oscar's had appeared beside it, 2 new additions to an inventory that would never be collected now that the signal had been cancelled. The door was open, Siberian wind howling through the gap, carrying snowflakes that melted against our faces like cold kisses, welcoming us back to a world that didn't know how close it had come to ending. Douglas went through first, then Teddy. I paused at the threshold, looking back into the darkness of the facility. Somewhere far below, Arkady Volkov stood eternal guard over a garden of human souls, ensuring that the harvest would never come. The message on the door had warned us that we were crops, not farmers. But sometimes crops grow thorns. Sometimes they fight back. Sometimes they sacrifice everything to ensure the next generation gets to keep growing, free from the shadow of those who planted them. I stepped through the door and into the frozen night, leaving the tomb to its new keeper. 3 months later, I stood in a cemetery in Tbilisi, watching Douglas place flowers on an empty grave. The headstone read Arkady Volkov, 1971 to 2024, followed by words in Georgian that Douglas had chosen himself. He'd told me the translation once. He became the shield so others could remain the sword. I didn't ask where the phrase came from. Some things between them had always been private, and death hadn't changed that. The Russian government had sealed the Verkhoyansk site within a week of our return. Official story was a mining accident that killed 6 researchers. Our expedition had never happened. Our colleagues had died in ways that could be explained by hypothermia and equipment failure rather than alien harvest facilities and 4-billion-year-old genetic farming operations. We'd tried telling the truth, of course. Teddy and I had spent weeks reaching out to journalists, scientists, anyone who might listen. But without proof, without the photographs that had been confiscated, without the samples that had been seized, without access to a site now surrounded by military checkpoints, we were just 3 traumatized academics suffering from shared delusions brought on by extreme cold exposure. Eventually, we stopped trying. Some truths are too large to be believed. Some horrors are too vast to be accepted by minds that need the universe to make sense. Teddy moved in with me 2 months ago. We found an apartment in Edinburgh, far from the academic circles that had quietly blacklisted us, far from the colleagues who looked at us with pity or suspicion. He teaches English to refugees now. I write papers about Bronze Age burial customs that no one reads. We cook dinner together, sleep in the same bed, pretend that normal life is still possible for people who've seen what we've seen. Most nights, I don't dream about the facility. Most nights, I can close my eyes without seeing Arkady's face dissolving into that skeletal frame, without hearing Oscar's screams echoing through corridors of preserved flesh, without feeling the weight of 8 billion souls pressing down on my conscience. Most nights. But sometimes I wake at 3:47 a.m., always that exact time, the moment the door first opened, and I feel something watching me from inside my own chest. A presence, a pressure, like a seed waiting to sprout. The doctors say the growths are benign, small nodules they call them, appearing in patients across the globe over the past few months. Nothing to worry about. Probably environmental. Probably coincidence that they're all the same shape, the same size, the same density. Probably meaningless that they show up on scans as perfect ovals like eggs waiting to hatch. Teddy has one, Douglas has one, I have 3. The harvest was cancelled. I believe that. Arkady's sacrifice meant something. The signal was never sent, and whatever collection system waits among the stars will wait forever, its summons never received. But the facility planted us 4 billion years ago. It shaped our evolution, guided our development, designed us for a purpose we were never meant to understand. And I wonder sometimes, in those dark hours before dawn, whether cancelling the harvest changed anything at all. We're still seeds. We're still growing towards something, and deep beneath the Siberian permafrost, a man who used to be my friend stands eternal watch over a garden of human souls, his conscious eyes staring out from a body that will never die, making sure the door stays closed. I hope he can't feel what's growing inside us. I hope he doesn't know that the crop is still ripening. Some nights, when the nodule in my chest pulses in time with my heartbeat, I swear I can hear him whispering, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Neither did we, Arkady, neither did any of us.